Story 1. The Whispering Woods. Lena had always loved hiking, finding solace in the tranquility of nature. The Whispering Woods, a forest notorious for eerie folklore, seemed like the perfect place for her weekend adventure. Despite the locals' warnings about the woods being haunted, Lena was undeterred. She set off early in the morning, her backpack filled with supplies and a map of the area. As Lena ventured deeper into the forest, she noticed an unsettling silence. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. She shrugged it off and continued her hike, following the narrow trail that wound through the dense trees. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, Lena realized she had strayed off the path. Panic set in as Lena tried to retrace her steps, but every direction seemed unfamiliar. The shadows grew longer, and the air turned colder. Suddenly, she heard a faint whisper, almost like a breathy voice calling her name. She spun around, but no one was there. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, coming from all directions. Desperate to find her way back, Lena quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers became clearer, forming disjointed words and phrases. "Join us," they said. "Stay with us forever." Lena stumbled upon a clearing where a decrepit cabin stood, its door slightly ajar. She hesitated but knew she needed shelter for the night. Inside, the cabin was filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. She found a worn-out journal on a table, its pages filled with frantic writings. The entries spoke of people who had disappeared in the woods, lured by the whispers. The last entry was a chilling message. "They're coming for me. I can't escape." Lena felt a cold breath on her neck and turned to see shadowy figures emerging from the darkness, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She grabbed the journal and ran, the whispers growing deafeningly loud. She burst out of the cabin and into the woods, her fear propelling her forward. The figures followed, their presence palpable. As dawn broke, Lena finally stumbled out of the forest, exhausted and terrified. She made it back to the town, where the locals found her in a state of shock. She told them about the whispers and the shadowy figures, but many dismissed her story as the result of fatigue and fear. However, some knew the truth. The Whispering Woods had claimed many souls, and Lena had barely escaped with her life. She never ventured into the forest again, haunted by the memories of that night. Story 2. The Visitor at the Window. Jack lived alone in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. He enjoyed the solitude and the peaceful countryside, far from the bustle of city life. One stormy night, as the wind howled and rain battered the windows, Jack settled into his armchair with a book. The power had gone out, and the only light came from the flickering candles scattered around the room. As Jack read, he heard a faint tapping at the window. He glanced up, expecting to see branches swaying in the wind, but the sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. A pale face with hollow eyes stared back at him through the glass. Jack blinked, convinced it was a trick of the light, but the face remained unmoving. He got up and approached the window cautiously, but as he did, the face disappeared. Jack's heart raced as he scanned the darkness outside, but there was no sign of anyone. He tried to shake off the unease and return to his chair, but the tapping resumed, louder this time. Jack grabbed a flashlight and decided to investigate. He stepped outside into the storm, the wind and rain lashing against him. He circled the house, shining the light into the shadows, but saw nothing. Just as he was about to go back inside, he heard a voice whisper his name. He turned to see the figure standing at the edge of the woods, its face eerily illuminated by the flashlight. The figure beckoned him closer, its eyes gleaming with a sinister light. Jack felt a compulsion to follow, his feet moving of their own accord. As he approached, the figure retreated into the woods, leading him deeper into the darkness. The woods were a maze of twisted trees and overgrown paths. Jack tried to resist the pull of the figure, but it seemed to control his movements. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices. He stumbled upon an old, abandoned cemetery where the figure finally stopped, standing next to an open grave. The ground around the grave was disturbed, as if something had recently been unearthed. Jack realized with horror that the grave was meant for him. The figure began to advance, its face contorted into a grotesque smile. Summoning all his strength, Jack broke free from the figure's control and ran back through the woods. The whispers chased him, urging him to return, but he pushed forward, fueled by sheer terror. He burst out of the forest and back to his farmhouse, slamming the door behind him. The storm had passed, and the first light of dawn filtered through the windows. Jack knew he had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The figure at the window never returned, but the memory of that night haunted him forever. He moved away from the farmhouse, unable to bear the thought of ever seeing that face again. Story 3: The Old Man in the Attic. Emily and her family had just moved into an old Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood. The house had a certain charm, despite its age, and they were excited to make it their new home. One evening, as Emily was exploring the attic, she came across a dusty trunk filled with old photographs and letters. Among the items was a portrait of an elderly man with piercing eyes and a stern expression. Emily felt a strange connection to the portrait, as if the man's eyes followed her every move. She decided to hang it on the wall in the attic, thinking it added to the house's historical ambience. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard faint footsteps coming from above. She brushed it off as the house settling and drifted off to sleep. The following nights, the noises grew more distinct, footsteps pacing back and forth, low murmurs, and the sound of something dragging across the floor. Emily's curiosity turned to fear when she found the attic door open one morning, despite having locked it the night before. She told her parents, but they dismissed her concerns, attributing the noises to the old house. Determined to uncover the source of the disturbances, Emily ventured into the attic with a flashlight. The air was cold and musty, and the portrait of the old man seemed to stare at her with an unsettling intensity. As she examined the room, she noticed scratch marks on the floor, leading to a corner where an old rocking chair stood. Suddenly, the chair began to rock on its own, and a cold breeze swept through the attic. Emily froze as a ghostly figure materialized in front of her, the old man from the portrait. His eyes were filled with anger, and he pointed a bony finger at her, his mouth moving soundlessly. Emily backed away, her heart pounding, but the door slammed shut, trapping her inside. The old man's ghost advanced, his form flickering like a candle flame. Emily frantically searched for a way out, her mind racing. She remembered the letters she had found and quickly rifled through the trunk. One letter, dated over a century ago, revealed the old man's identity and his tragic story. He had been the original owner of the house, driven to madness by the loss of his family. The letter ended with a plea for forgiveness and peace. With trembling hands, Emily read the letter aloud, hoping to appease the restless spirit. The ghost paused, his expression softening as he listened. The attic grew silent, and the ghost slowly faded away, leaving behind a sense of calm. The attic door creaked open, and Emily hurried downstairs, clutching the letter. She explained everything to her parents, who finally believed her after seeing the fear in her eyes. They decided to hold a small ceremony to honor the old man and his family, hoping to bring him the peace he had long sought. The disturbances ceased, and the house became a true home for Emily and her family. The portrait remained in the attic, a reminder of the spirit they had encountered. Emily often thought of the old man, grateful that she had helped him find rest. The haunting had ended, but the memory of that close encounter stayed with her forever. Story 4. The Empty House. In the dead of night, when the streets are deserted and the moon hides behind thick clouds, Emily found herself standing before the abandoned house on Elm Street. Rumors swirled like ghosts about the place, tales of a family that disappeared without a trace, of strange lights flickering in the attic windows long after the electricity had been cut off. Ignoring the warnings echoing in her mind, Emily pushed open the rusted gate and stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the front door. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the very ground beneath her protested her intrusion. The door creaked open, revealing a yawning darkness within. With trembling hands, Emily reached for her flashlight and ventured inside. Shadows danced along the walls, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. As she explored the silent corridors, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every corner held a new terror, every room a whispered secret. And then she saw it, a figure, pale and ethereal, standing at the end of the hallway. With a scream caught in her throat, Emily turned to flee, but the door had slammed shut behind her, trapping her in the darkness with whatever lurked within the empty house. Story 5. The Midnight Caller. Sarah had always been afraid of the phone ringing in the middle of the night. It was a fear born from childhood nights spent listening to her parents argue in hushed tones, the phone always ringing at the worst possible moment. So, when the shrill ring shattered the silence of her apartment at exactly midnight, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. With trembling hands, she reached for the receiver, dreading the voice on the other end. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Static crackled through the line, and for a moment, Sarah thought she heard a distant whisper. Then, a voice spoke, low and guttural, like the growl of some unseen beast. Alone at last, it hissed, sending shivers down Sarah's spine. With a gasp, she slammed the phone down and raced to lock the doors and windows. But no matter how tightly she secured her sanctuary, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted by something that lingered just beyond the edge of perception. As the hours dragged on, Sarah huddled in the corner of her room, praying for the first light of dawn to banish the darkness and the horrors that lurked within. Story 6: The Haunting Melody. It was said that the old piano in the attic had a mind of its own, that it whispered secrets in the dead of night, luring unsuspecting souls to their doom with its haunting melody. Julia had never believed the stories, dismissing them as the fanciful imaginings of bored children. But when she inherited the old mansion from her eccentric aunt, she found herself drawn to the attic like a moth to a flame. The air was thick with dust and the scent of age as Julia approached the ancient instrument. With hesitant fingers, she brushed away the cobwebs and lifted the lid, revealing the yellowed keys beneath. As she began to play, the notes echoed through the empty attic, filling the silence with a mournful wail. But then, something shifted. The melody twisted and warped, taking on a sinister edge that sent a chill down Julia's spine. She tried to stop, to flee from the attic and the cursed piano, but her fingers refused to obey. And as the last haunting notes faded into the darkness, Julia knew that she was no longer alone, that something malevolent lurked in the shadows, hungry for the soul of whoever dared to disturb its slumber. Alone at night, the world takes on a different hue, one filled with shadows and whispers, where every sound is magnified into a symphony of terror. In the darkness, the mind plays tricks, conjuring monsters from the depths of imagination and blurring the line between reality and nightmare. But perhaps it is in that darkness that we find our truest selves, stripped of the distractions of the day, forced to confront the fears that lurk within. And though the night may be long and filled with terrors, it is also a crucible, forging courage from fear and strength from adversity. So the next time you find yourself alone at night, remember these tales and know that you are not truly alone. For in the darkness, there are always stories waiting to be told and horrors waiting to be faced.